Imagine for a moment that time is not as fixed as we believe. Every day we live inside a simple pattern. The past is gone, the future has not yet come, and the present moment slips away almost instantly. But what if a human being could step beyond this flow? What if the great yogis of India discovered a way to perceive reality beyond the limits of time itself? Ancient spiritual traditions speak about extraordinary abilities known as siddhis, mystical capacities that arise in deep states of meditation. Some stories describe yogis who could know distant events, see the past and the future, or understand the subtle movements of the universe in ways that seem impossible to the ordinary mind. For centuries, seekers have wondered, are these stories symbolic, exaggerated legends, or do they point toward a deeper science of consciousness that modern people have not yet understood? In the tradition of Kriya Yoga, revived by the great householder master Lahiri Mahasaya, these questions take on a very interesting meaning. Lahiri Mahasaya rarely spoke about miracles, yet the depth of his spiritual realization inspired countless seekers to explore the hidden potential of the human mind. Yogic texts like the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali even describe how certain powers can arise naturally when the mind becomes perfectly concentrated and the life force is mastered through meditation. Among these descriptions are abilities that sound very close to what we might call traveling through time. But here we must pause and ask a deeper question. Did the ancient yogis truly mean physical time travel, or were they pointing towards something far more subtle? A state of awareness where consciousness is no longer bound by past, present, and future? To understand this mystery, we must look carefully at the teachings of the yogic masters, the science of meditation, and the true purpose of spiritual practice. To understand whether yogis can truly travel through time, we must first understand a very important concept in the yogic tradition, siddhis. In Sanskrit, the word siddhi means accomplishment, perfection, or a special attainment that arises through deep spiritual practice. In many ancient yogic texts, siddhis are described as extraordinary abilities that appear when the mind becomes deeply concentrated and the life force, or prana, is brought under control through meditation. These abilities are not considered supernatural in the yogic worldview. Rather, they are seen as natural possibilities of consciousness when it is no longer limited by the restless activity of the mind. The tradition of yoga describes many different siddhis. Some texts mention the ability to perceive distant places, understand the thoughts of others, or gain knowledge of past and future events. Others speak about the yogi becoming extremely light or heavy, influencing the elements of nature, or perceiving subtle dimensions of reality that ordinary senses cannot detect. For many people hearing these descriptions for the first time, they sound like mystical legends or spiritual exaggerations. However, within the yogic tradition, these abilities are explained as byproducts of deep inner mastery rather than magical performances. Yet the most important teaching about siddhis is often overlooked. The great masters of yoga, including Lahiri Mahasaya, repeatedly reminded seekers that these powers are not the true purpose of spiritual practice. In fact, becoming fascinated by siddhis can easily distract a seeker from the real goal of yoga, which is self-realization. When the mind becomes attracted to power or recognition, the ego becomes stronger instead of dissolving. Lahiri Mahasaya gently advised his students to remain steady in their Kriya practice and not chase extraordinary experiences. According to him, the greatest attainment is not mystical ability but the realization of the divine presence within one's own consciousness. To understand the subject of mystical powers more clearly, it is helpful to look at what one of the most authoritative texts on yoga actually says. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, written thousands of years ago, is considered one of the foundational guides to the science of meditation and inner transformation. In this text, Patanjali does not ignore the subject of extraordinary abilities. In fact, he discusses them in a very precise and structured way in the third chapter, known as Vibhuti-pada. This chapter explains how certain unusual capacities may arise when the mind becomes deeply refined through meditation. Patanjali introduces an important practice called samayam, which is the combined practice of 3 stages of meditation: concentration, meditation, and complete absorption. When a yogi learns to hold the mind steadily on a single object without distraction, the mind becomes incredibly powerful and clear. Through this deep state of focused awareness, the yogi begins to perceive subtle aspects of reality that are normally hidden from ordinary perception. According to the sutras, when samyam is applied to different principles of nature, different forms of knowledge or abilities may arise. For example, meditation on the movement of the mind can reveal knowledge about past impressions, and meditation on the nature of time can lead to insight about past and future events. However, Patanjali also gives a very important warning that many seekers forget. He explains that these abilities, although real possibilities within advanced meditation, can become obstacles on the spiritual path if the practitioner becomes attached to them. The moment the mind begins to seek power or special recognition, the deeper state of liberation becomes more difficult to reach. The purpose of yoga, according to Patanjali, is not the development of mystical abilities but the complete stilling of the mind so that pure awareness can be realized. This teaching echoes the guidance later given by masters like Lahiri Mahasaya, who encouraged sincere practice and inner realization rather than fascination with spiritual powers. Now we arrive at the question that fascinates many seekers: can yogis actually travel through time? To explore this idea, we must first understand how yoga views the nature of time itself. In our ordinary experience, time appears to move in a straight line. We remember the past, we experience the present moment, and we imagine the future. This constant movement gives us the feeling that time is always flowing forward. But according to the yogic understanding of consciousness, this experience of time is closely connected to the activity of the mind. When the mind is restless and constantly moving between memories and expectations, we experience time as something that is always passing. However, in deep meditation something very different begins to occur. As the breath becomes calm and the mind becomes still, the constant stream of thoughts gradually slows down. When this happens, the sense of time also begins to change. Advanced practitioners often report that long periods of meditation can feel like only a few moments, or that their awareness becomes deeply absorbed in a state where the usual sense of past and future disappears. In yogic philosophy, this happens because the mind is no longer projecting itself across time. Instead, consciousness rests in the depth of the present moment. Because of this expanded awareness, some yogic texts suggest that highly advanced practitioners may develop an intuitive perception of patterns that extend beyond the present moment. In other words, the yogi may gain insight into the tendencies that shape past and future events. This does not necessarily mean that the yogi is physically traveling through time like in a science fiction story. Rather, it suggests that when consciousness becomes deeply refined, it can perceive reality from a level that is not limited by ordinary mental boundaries. In the teachings associated with Lahiri Mahasaya and the practice of Kriya Yoga, this deeper understanding is not pursued for curiosity or power. Instead, it is seen as a natural expansion of awareness that arises when the mind becomes completely still and united with the deeper presence of the self. At this point, it is important to consider another key idea when studying mystical powers in yoga: the difference between symbolic meaning and literal interpretation. Throughout spiritual traditions, teachings are often expressed through poetic language, metaphors, and symbolic descriptions. Ancient yogic texts were not always written as scientific manuals in the modern sense. Instead, they used imagery and symbolic expressions to describe experiences that are difficult to explain through ordinary language. Because of this, many descriptions of yogic powers can sometimes be misunderstood when they are interpreted only in a literal way. For example, when scriptures say that a yogi can move anywhere instantly, this may not necessarily mean that the physical body disappears and reappears in another place. It may describe the ability of consciousness to expand beyond the limitations of the senses. In deep meditation, the practitioner may experience awareness that is no longer confined to the small boundaries of the body and mind. Similarly, when texts mention knowledge of past or future events, It may refer to a heightened state of intuition and perception that arises when the mind becomes completely clear and quiet. In such a state, the yogi begins to perceive patterns of cause and effect with remarkable clarity. In the teachings connected with Kriya Yoga, this understanding becomes especially important. Lahiri Mahasaya emphasized a practical and grounded approach to spirituality. He encouraged his students to focus on sincere meditation rather than becoming absorbed in extraordinary claims or dramatic interpretations of spiritual experiences. For him, the deeper purpose of yogic practice was always inner realization. Whether certain experiences appear symbolic or literal, the essential point remains the same. The goal is to purify the mind, calm the breath, and awaken the direct awareness of the divine presence within. When seekers keep their attention on this deeper purpose, they avoid confusion and remain steady on the path of true spiritual growth. One of the greatest cautions given by spiritual masters throughout history is the danger of becoming overly fascinated with mystical powers. While the idea of extraordinary abilities can be exciting and mysterious, it can also become a subtle distraction on the spiritual path. The human mind is naturally attracted to anything that feels special or extraordinary, and when seekers hear about siddhis, it can easily create the desire to obtain these powers. However, this desire can strengthen the ego rather than dissolve it, which moves the practitioner further away from the true goal of yoga. In many spiritual traditions, it is explained that the ego can hide itself in very subtle ways. Even when a person begins sincere spiritual practice, the mind may still seek recognition, control, or a sense of superiority. If a practitioner begins to focus on gaining powers, the practice can slowly shift from inner purification to the pursuit of personal ability. Instead of moving toward humility and freedom, the mind may become more attached to identity and achievement. This is why great masters repeatedly reminded their disciples to remain cautious and steady. Lahiri Mahasaya gave very simple and practical guidance on this matter. When students reported visions, unusual sensations, or extraordinary experiences during meditation, he often advised them not to become attached to those experiences. He encouraged them to continue their Kriya practice calmly and regularly, without excitement or fear. According to his teachings, spiritual progress happens through consistent discipline, devotion, and inner stillness rather than dramatic phenomena. The true measure of spiritual growth is not the appearance of mystical abilities, but the development of qualities such as peace, compassion, patience, and humility. When a seeker remains focused on these deeper transformations, the path of yoga becomes stable, sincere, and free from unnecessary distractions. After exploring the mystery of siddhis, the teachings of Patanjali, and the warnings given by great masters, we arrive at the most important understanding of all. The real miracle of Kriya Yoga is not the development of mystical powers. The real miracle is the transformation of human consciousness. When a person begins sincere spiritual practice, the first change often appears very quietly. The restless mind slowly begins to calm down. The breath becomes softer and more balanced. The constant stream of thoughts that once filled the mind begins to lose its intensity. Over time, this inner stillness creates a new kind of awareness that is deeper, clearer, and more peaceful than ordinary mental activity. In the tradition of Kriya Yoga taught by Lahiri Mahasaya, this transformation is considered the true purpose of the practice. Through steady discipline and devotion, the practitioner gradually turns attention inward and begins to experience the subtle presence of life energy within the body. As awareness deepens, the seeker may begin to feel moments of profound peace, inner light, or a deep sense of connection with something greater than the individual self. These experiences are not pursued for excitement or curiosity. They are simply signs that the mind is becoming more refined and receptive to deeper levels of consciousness. Eventually, the practitioner begins to understand something that the yogic masters have taught for centuries. The deepest freedom is not found in controlling the outer world but in realizing the true nature of the self. When the mind becomes completely still, awareness enters a state beyond the ordinary flow of time. In this state, the past and the future lose their hold on the mind, and the seeker experiences the fullness of the present moment. This realization is often described as the doorway to samadhi, the highest state of meditation. In this way, the greatest attainment in Kriya Yoga is not the ability to travel through time, but the discovery of the timeless consciousness that has always existed within. As we come to the end of this exploration, let us return to the original question that inspired this discussion. Can yogis truly travel through time? The ancient yogic traditions suggest that when the mind becomes deeply still and consciousness expands beyond ordinary perception, a person may begin to understand reality in ways that go far beyond the limits of everyday experience. Yet the greatest masters, including Lahiri Mahasaya, gently remind its seekers that the real purpose of spiritual practice is not to chase extraordinary powers or mysterious abilities. The true journey of yoga is inward. It is the gradual discovery of the divine presence within our own consciousness, a presence that exists beyond the restless movement of the mind and beyond the illusion of past and future. Through sincere practice, patience, and humility, every seeker can begin to experience greater peace, clarity, and awareness in daily life. This inner transformation is far more valuable than any mystical ability. When the mind becomes calm and the heart becomes pure, the practitioner begins to realize that the deepest freedom is not found in controlling time, but in discovering the timeless reality that exists within every moment. This is the wisdom that great yogis have shared for centuries, and it remains just as relevant for modern seekers today. If this video helped you reflect more deeply on the teachings of yoga and the path of inner realization, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think about this topic. Do you believe siddhis should be taken literally, or do you see them as symbolic expressions of deeper states of consciousness? Your reflections may help other seekers who are walking the same path. And if there is a particular question about Kriya Yoga, meditation, or spiritual wisdom that you would like to explore in the next video, please write it in the comments as well. Your suggestions can help guide future discussions on this channel. Thank you for spending this time in reflection and learning together. Until the next video, continue your practice with sincerity and devotion. Jai Guru Dev.